Hi everyone, and welcome to this presentation. The topic of the presentation is starting to take a look at artificial intelligence and machine learning for QARA organizations in MedTech. And really the motivation behind this is it's a new technology. And at least what I see in my world, seems to be a big gap between the traditional quality organization with its document-based management systems, or EQMS, and more modern approaches to software development. And I think one of the ways to bridge those gaps is to get the QARA organizations interested in new technologies, such as AIML, which depend on quite interesting data sets, which unfortunately do not live inside Word or Excel documents. And maybe if you see the benefit from AI and ML and start moving down that approach, it leads the whole organization into better ways of working, more efficient ways of working, and ultimately delivering safer and more performing devices. So what we're going to do today is, so why are we here? So really what I'd like to do is to demonstrate steps that every MedTech QARA organization can do to begin their AI ML journey. So this is really at the beginning of artificial intelligence, ML, so the basics, real basics, but from that forms a strong foundation to move forward onto other things. A little bit about me. Won't go into this in a lot of detail, but I think one of the probably relevant points is my undergraduate degree is actually in pure mathematics and mathematical statistics. So a lot of the math behind these AI ML algorithms and the code are based on the same sort of theories, mathematical techniques that I learned, unfortunately a long time ago. But when you apply massive computing power, some very interesting strategies to the code, these become very powerful. And again, in my day, I was doing these solutions on pieces of paper, and we don't have to do that anymore. So you can run through a lot of iterations to get a lot of really interesting insight into your data. So on top of that too, I've been in leadership positions in startup MedTech, developed my own medical device software, and I consult mainly in medical device software to the industry. So transparency statement, these are my views only. These are not advice, and really just for educational purposes. So, we're all responsible for our own actions, and I do hope this is helpful. So to frame maybe how AIML could be useful, I'll take a very simple business example. Let's say we've got an imaginary company and we have 3 product teams. We have a team producing class 1 products, a team for class 2 products, and a team for class 3 products. And as a QARA head, or maybe the board comes and asks you a question, it's like, well, how are these teams performing? And what do we have to do to optimize the team? Okay, so pretty valid questions, and ones that we probably will get asked. And so what we do, we can state that problem as a mathematical formula. Okay, and again, this is super simple. I'm here to demonstrate the application, not real world examples, but so just bear with me on this. So let's say for a given level of requirements, i.e. class 1 requirements, class 2, class 3, and as we know, the higher risk class you go, the requirements to deliver that product increase, more work basically. Then within that group of requirements, our organizational performance can be determined by a very simple formula. Performance is going to equal the efficiency of an efficiency coefficient multiplied by the level of resources we have. So if we're operating at 100% efficiency, our 1 unit of performance will equal 1 unit of resource. If we're operating at 0% efficiency, doesn't matter how many resources you have, multiplication by 0 will deliver 0 performance. So this is the model we're going to use. And in fact, we're going to make it even simpler. We're going to assume the performance index is 100%. So what that gives us is a straight linear correlation between performance and resource of 1. So you get this line at 45 degrees. And just to talk you through this chart, and I call it the 3 bears, because in some ways we are going to do a little bit of a 3 bears exercise, where each of the 3 bears will have their porridge. So each of these are our bowls, and then we're going to be Goldilocks and assess the porridge and see is it too hot, too cold, just right. A little bit silly, but hey, you got to have a bit of fun. So if we have a look, as we said beginning, each product team is managing a different class of products. So we would expect that class 1 would have the lowest amount of resource need to fulfill the requirements. Class 2 would have higher. So let's say that has 1 unit of resource to deliver 1 unit of performance. Class 2, 2 units for 2 units performance. Class 3, 3 units of resource for 3 units performance. Now, again, we're assuming we know what an optimal organization looks like. We're assuming that this is correct, okay? So we're taking on a lot of assumptions here, but again, for illustrative purposes. So that's the target. That's where our organization should be. So let's say we go along, we do some analysis and we work out where they are. Then what we can do, we can plot a chart like this, where we're plotting where our organizations are, which is the big circles, versus where they should be, which are the small circles. So if we take the class 1 team, what they're doing, they're underperforming. So they should be at this level. If we draw a line from the yellow dot to the left towards the performance axis, this is where their performance should be. And where they are, if we draw a line from the center of the dot to the performance axis, they're down here. So they have to move up. So I've got that vector there, P equals +1. So we have to increase performance by 1 unit. But again, on the resource side, we can see that versus the dot where they should be, if we drop a line from that dot to the x-axis, we can see their resource should be here. But if we drop a line from the center of the circle, the big circle to the line, they're here. So again, to get them on track, we need to reduce their resource. So what does that mean? They're over-resourced and they're underperforming. So that's our too cold porridge, okay? So they're not doing what they want and they're consuming too much resource, not doing what they should be doing. If we go to the class 2 team, they're on the other side of the line, the left-hand side of the line, and it's the opposite. We can see that they're overperforming. So they need to drop for optimal balance between performance and resource. They need to drop their performance by 1, but also they're using less resource, okay? So, they need to increase their resource. Now, most leaders will say that's not a problem, but we'll come on to that later. Just like a car, if you rev it too high for too long, the thing's going to break. So maybe they're performing now, but this team is going to break in the future, which is why you want them to reduce the outputs and balance their resources. And then we got class 3, which is a just right. And I think this is my experience in consulting, that the higher the risk class, the better compliance you have. What we see there is that they're on the line. So we don't have to adjust anything. They don't have to change performance. They don't have to change their resourcing. Okay, so that's the first analysis. But what we can do now is actually transform the reference point of our data to something like this. Now, it's the same data, but it's mapped against a different reference, and that reference is versus where we want them. So we saw on the previous slide, if we look at the blue, the class 2 product, we saw that they were under-resourced by 1, and they were overperforming by 1. So what we have here on the axis is a performance differential, the vertical axis, performance differential versus where we want them. So we can see here that they're performing at this level where the blue dot is, but they need to be performing down here. So again, they have to make a move of performance -1 to get to that point. And then on the resourcing side, we saw they were under-resourced by 1. So again, if we drop a line from the center of the big blue circle here, they've got a resource differential of -1. So they have a lack of resource, and they need to make a 1 move to the right to get to the center point. And we could do the same for the 1. They'll have to move up 1 performance and down 1 resource to get to the center. So while this is really simple, this assessment of where we are versus where we want to be is one of the core techniques that your AIML algorithm will do to learn, right? Because we can set up a strategy, and we'll see that a bit later, where the AIML can experiment with the numbers and say, well, what if I added 2 resource and reduced 3 performance? Where am I here? And where do I have to go? Did I get closer? Did I get further away? And can iterate through that. Again, we could just let it iterate through every single example and see if it finds from that set of all examples, find the ones that match. But that's going to be a very inefficient algorithm. So we need to balance, the computing time and power we need to run it. We don't want to run calculations if we don't need to. So we need something sort of semi-intelligent, or at least a strategy for the algorithm, so it can find its way towards the center. Okay, so this is, again, what I would say. I think if there's people on the call who are interested, you may know this already. Like, again, we're really starting at the beginning, but if you don't, there's a lot of really good online course to sort of explain this, in really simple terms. So again, we're starting super simple. We had 2 dimensions. We had a performance and a resource, and we had a correlation between the two. But we can expand that space from 2-dimensional space to 3-dimensional space. And let's say we put in the one I mentioned before about employee turnover. Okay, so we had the team which is overperforming, under-resourced. But if we included in our data set employee turnover, maybe we find out that's at the expense of burning employees, for example. So, maybe that's something we want to consider in our model as well. We need to balance all these different things for the right performance. Now, with 3D space, that's sort of almost the limit of what we can think about as a human. Einstein had the 4th with time, and some of us, well, maybe not me, but some people can understand that. But really, at this point, we get into sort of theoretical space, right, with multi-dimensions. And again, our human intelligence, pretty hard to, mentally think through it. And again, just in terms of time resource to manually calculate, these equations with multiple, multiple dimensions in them, it just takes a hell of a lot of time, which is, again, why we enjoy the technology we have with AIML. So our reality is actually a lot more complex than a 2-dimensional model or even a 3-dimensional model. So our data is going to be, we could probably fill up a vector like this. And again, a vector is really just a list of data. There's different ways to think about it. So we could fill up a vector for our organization with, God knows how many metrics, okay? And generally, when we do this, we look at it as a leader or as an employee or whatever. We may not know what is the underlying formula which explains the data. So we've got inputs and outputs. We may not necessarily know how they interact. It's like a black box. And we have a pretty good, over time, we have a pretty good gut feel. But, when you subject it to really empirical analysis, detailed analysis, we may get a lot of insights that we don't know about our organization. And that's what we're looking for initially. And then eventually what we want to do is build predictive models, so we can look at data coming out of our factories or out of our organization and say, there's going to be a problem here. I better get on top of it, and we can predict things. Okay. And again, the AIML can process a hell of a lot of data and spit out these answers for us, where, we could have teams of analysts and probably still not do that heavy lifting. So the good news is, with this technology, we have ways of finding out, trawling through that data and seeing what we can find. Now, again, a little bit of a math lecture here. I'll try to keep it simple. But again, if you can sort of get your head around this, this is one of the strategies we can do to program our AI to find optimal solutions. So in the left-hand box on the top, we've got a multivariate formula here. Okay, so we've got like some result y, which is determined by these variables. Okay, so we have that relation between an outcome and variables. And what we need to know is, what are the variables that explain our outcome? And, a lot of these formulas cannot be solved mathematically. We need to do a trial and error to find them. So if we take a starting point, let's say we don't know the formula, but we've got these variables and we're just going to guess what the formula is. Okay, there's maybe some tests we can do before that. We have to work out if these variables are independent of each other, because if we have dependent variables, we're just duplicating. We're making our formula more messy than it needs to be, so we can filter out independent variables. But assuming we've got a decent set of independent variables, then we can just start playing around. Okay, so let's say, for example, we do first iteration, which is the black iteration here, which is y0, and we calculate a result. And what we do is, we've got our data here. So these are our dots. Again, we have a linear line here. Again, a multivariate like this is not going to be linear. But for illustration purposes, this is simple. We have a plot going through our data. We say, okay, how good is this plot? Does it explain our data? And one way of measuring the goodness of fit, or is it optimal, whatever term we want to use for good, is our model good, is what's called the sum of least squares distance. The sum of distance, for example, from the line is one of the statistics. So basically we take all this complex data, we look at the distance between the dot, our data, and the line we've generated from our formula, and we basically add up the distances from all these lines in one formula, and we get a number. Now, if all these black dots were on the line, every black dot's distance from our calculated line would be 0, and the sum of all the differences are 0, and that means we've got a perfect fit. Okay, so brilliant. So that's what we're aiming for. 0 is the 0 point. Obviously 0 is the 0 point, but 0 is the optimal solution to our problem. In reality, it's never that way. As a compromise, we try to find the line that snakes through it. But it's the same technique here. At the moment, for the first iteration, we kind of maybe don't care how accurate it is. We just run it. We calculate the line. We calculate the differences. We sum them up. We get the single number, and then we'll plot them. Okay. So again, for example, if we go back to our old example, let's say we can break it down to performance and resource. We're going to have a dot in some n space, depending on how many items we have in there. But if we break it down to a 2D space formula, what we've got here is we do the first iteration and we're at this blue bar here, okay? We go, oh, that's interesting, okay? But the AI, the formula, the machine learning may want to find out, okay, well, where am I in space, okay? Am I close or am I not close? So what it'll do is do 2 iterations, it'll change the variables and calculate where we are. So for example, it'll do 1 iteration, 1, which will end up here to the top right. And then it'll do another iteration, 2, which will end up down here. And then it will assess basically in this case, the relative value in terms of the sum of the distance. This one is bigger, which means it's further away from our optimal curve. This one's smaller. So the AI is going to go, or we program the AI to say, okay, we're not going to investigate from this point here. We're going to say, okay, we know that this point is closer than this point, so let's keep moving in that direction and see what's happening. So maybe what the AI does then is says, okay, we're going to move down, we're going to move up. So you can see here we're moving up and down from the point, and then we get here, we do exactly the same iteration. We take the whatever our optimization formula is, and we say, okay, well, this one is actually closer than this one, so we're going to not investigate that one any further. But guess what? We're now where we were this side of the line, we're now the other side of the line. And then what it may do is flip and try to start going back this direction. Okay. So this is one model. There's different strategies, there's different mathematics. But the idea is that the vector, whatever that vector is, will describe a position in space. It will move, we can do relative measures, etc. And eventually iterate through to some sort of optimal configuration, and then once it's within a certain level of tolerance, it'll stop and say, hey, this is your answer. So again, this is very much a optimization. There's formulas for pathfinding, mazes. So another application that I'm trying to work on in the background is, can I get AI to work through my quality management system, and can it follow the steps in my quality management system to actually come to the conclusion it should come to? Okay, so that could be an interesting model as well, amongst a whole bunch others that we could find. So that's really sort of as far as I want to go today. Again, it's pretty simple, it's pretty introductory, but again, understanding the idea that our data can be explained by some sort of formula, converting a data set, comparing it versus whatever plot that formula gives, and then starting to get your idea around strategies that we can code into our AI to actually start moving us towards an optimal point, as opposed to moving away from that. Okay, and that's not everything, obviously, but it's a good starting point to get into. And there's a lot of really good videos online which are free. and give you the code and give you the approaches, and if you're interested, you can go in and really start doing it yourself. Okay, but if you don't want to do it yourself and you're running an organization, how would you start? So again, we've got a simple 5-step process, which could be the way. And one of the things is, I would say, is as a leader, you need to own this and drive it. Okay, even though it says intelligence in there, it's artificial. Okay, so I heard somebody say that us humans, we actually are the intelligence here, and AI is a tool that we can use. So it's our responsibility for us to drive this, get on top of it. Heard people say that AIML is very much like the printing press, that if you've got access to the printer and you can print the books, access to the books, it gives you a huge societal advantage, right? And we don't have to dive into that. I think it's 100% true. And every organization, every employee, etc., independently should try and get a handle of this technology. Don't have to be the best coder in the world, whatever, but to actually understand how to use it is super critical at this stage. So how would you start? So the first one, we define the problem or define the questions. What do I want to know? Like I said, is my quality management system logical? Can an AI find its way through all the steps and do end up at the conclusion it should do? How efficient am I as an organization, right? Or how efficient are my teams? And then start to look for the differences between the teams. There's a whole bunch of questions you could ask. Why am I keep getting quality problems? And look at the whole design and development process, from your requirements all the way through to production, customer feedback, and try and find out what's going on there, right? And just throw that data at it. And one way to do that, just talk to your leadership, talk to the industry, find out what questions are generally there. Go to the MORD database. I had a meeting yesterday with somebody who has got a product for looking at that. There's been 9 million incidents in the MORD database over the last 3 years. So as an industry, we're not short of data. And who you're speaking to find out those things, talk to your quality leadership, or if you are the quality leadership, talk to the CEO, the board, your employees, walk around the floor of your people in manufacturing. They're generally really good people to speak to. They see it every day, what goes right and what goes wrong. And just start, asking, building a list of questions. Now, the next step is one that I predict a lot of quality departments may actually struggle with. Not all of them, but some of them will, but it's getting your data in shape. So the average business in general, but especially the quality departments, they'll have a lot of information in forms, in PDFs, in Word documents, in Excel tables, etc. And these are really hard forms of data to work with. Okay, so again, it comes out of an old paradigm. We used to use paper, we don't anymore. We still need the PDFs, but we don't need the Word documents to produce the PDFs, right? So I did a presentation sort of on Agile approaches to quality management, and I'll do more, hopefully, webinars on that. But this whole, being more agile, separating your content, your PDFs, your content being the, the A4 PDF or the letter PDF if you're in the USA, from the source of the data, which is really, a lot of data is just text and numbers. And one thing you can do there is work with your IT department. If you've got a software developer, work with your DevOps. I predict that QARA departments will work more like software development departments in the future. So you'll have a QARA ops department similar to DevOps, but maintaining your QARA systems, and just start, looking at what data you've got and seeing what sort of data tables you can build. So, if you're coding in Python, you can use a lot of, CSV files, for example, is very accessible. Databases are good too, obviously. But you need to get that data in some sort of structured format so your AI programs can get a run at it. Then the next one would be to start building the models. Okay, so the first 2 steps you can do yourself. Maybe get some internal help from your IT departments, your IT experts. But when you're starting to build these models, you probably really need to get a data scientist in. Okay, and again, these roles will become more and more critical for every organization. And basically, you want this person in to have a look at your data, look at your questions, and start coming up with models to run on your data. And the first steps are run it, take a look at it. Then you've got to start training it, optimizing it, whatever, until you get to a point where it can be sort of autonomous or fairly autonomous. And you need these data scientists to work with your leaders, with your IT people, etc., to start just diving into it again. And that's a pretty interesting skill set, because these people are generally very good mathematicians, statisticians, very good coders as well. And they can really, obviously help to bring things together, provide the analytical insight and the automation needed. And then once you get something out of that, you're going to waste a bit of time, go through some dead ends, but eventually, something's going to turn up in your data. You learn something, so build something and just keep learning. Oh, I learned that, that's interesting. Play around with it, change something, see how that affects the model. Just go through these iterations. Do that with your whole team now. So you should have a team. Your leadership should be engaged, your quality department engaged, your IT guys, your data scientists engaged. And eventually, hopefully, you'll find a good solution where it's worthwhile actually investing in permanent AI/ML infrastructure. Implement and reiterate, wash and repeat, and just look for continual improvement in your current models. Look for new results, etc. And for me, I really think this is the future. So you imagine, for example, you want to know, if I'm a large multinational, I've got maybe hundreds of products, I've got hundreds of technical files in 100 countries around the world, and I want to know how compliant my technical files are. You imagine if you had an AI which could go through your technical files, compare it to the standards, and go, yeah, okay, this one looks pretty good, this one looks pretty bad, and score all your technical files and point out the hotspots, right? So you can be very proactive about doing that. And I think that's within the realms of our technology today. Like I said, go through your quality system. Again, you could compare your quality system versus standards. You could run through the path, your quality system, your processes, your work instructions, see if there's any logic gaps there or there's inconsistency in use of terms. There's really a whole bunch of stuff you could do. But one of the reasons I said about did the example here about organizational performance is, if you look at the traditional quality department, which are working with MS Office and loading things into document management systems, you've got these really brilliant people, highly skilled, and they're doing a lot of file, save as, expert. Oh, we've got duplicated copies of documents. I need to sort that out. I need to manually load to document management systems, right? And also sitting in meetings they don't need to be in, right? So big companies want everybody in the meeting necessarily. And I predict in some cases from 30% to 50% wastage of your really high skilled resources on non-value added tasks, right? So you can start doing the automation, estimate what that non-value adding task is, and then you can actually, I'm a big proponent of working agile. You can just, do your analysis and work out if you can actually release 30% of your, increase the productivity of your organization by 30%, right? So if you've got, I think one of my last customers had about 700 people globally. If you release 30%, that's almost takes you up to the equivalent of 1,000 people from 700 in terms of effectiveness. Okay, so there's plenty of opportunity here. And one of the other areas is becoming a strategic partners for the CEO and the board. So again, with a lot of inefficiencies, old ways of working, product development cycles can be long. Often the quality department slows down the development. And if you look at the number of recalls and the problems we're seeing in the post-market public database for post-market surveillance, we're not doing a good job of producing compliant, safe products. So we're slowing things down, producing low quality products. So, if you can, your QARA department can use modern technologies, agile approaches, be proactive, and really lead the business in terms of what quality means, then, you can really shift your QARA leadership to, really at the board level, be a partner for the CEO, partner for the CFO in different ways than you are today. You really become a strategic operational enabler, as opposed to what I've heard a lot of people say, we got to get the minimum level of compliance. So you move from market access to a partner. We're up to 30 minutes, so we're going to wrap up. So, what I would say is just start, okay? Don't worry about the distant goal. You just got to get moving, start moving in the right direction. As you get insights and learn, you will correct, you will learn, and you will develop this for yourself. And the other one I'll say is probably don't rely on your vendors. I'm not fully convinced that the vendors today will be able to solve this for you. As I said, you really need to get a DevOps approach to your quality department and in-house a lot of it. Your vendors providing transactional systems, EQMS systems, whatever your tool chains are, they can be very helpful, don't get me wrong, there's good products, but you need to assess them against potentially this new need for Agile, this new need for making the data accessible for automation, optimization sort of strategies. So that's the presentation today. I'm very happy to take questions. So if there's questions, please drop them into the chat. I will stay on the line here for a few minutes, just looking at the chat to see if anything's coming through. But otherwise, feel free to contact me if you've got questions. If there's something you liked, let me know. If there's something you didn't like or you think I got wrong, please let me know. And I really thank you for your attendance today. This is, I think, the future for the medtech industry. Precision engineering, understanding compliance won't be enough in the future. We need to get sort of more high tech. And yeah, this is one of the really big carrots we can hang in front of our QARA departments to get them motivated and interested into this new paradigm. So again, thank you very much. Like I said, I'll hang on the line for a couple of minutes to see if anything comes through the chat. And if not, I wish you all a wonderful afternoon. Okay, so I think I'm going to wrap up the presentation. Thank you so much. You can feel free to message me on LinkedIn if there's any follow-up. But appreciate your attendance. You could be doing a lot of other things at the moment, and you chose to listen to this webinar. So I wish you a wonderful afternoon, and hopefully we'll be in contact in the future.